Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Collegewise Virtual College Fair. We're about to have a panel discussion called MythBusters, the College Admission Edition. Just a couple of announcements before we get started. You can use the question and answer button on your screen to type questions to the presenters at any time. Your microphone and camera are both turned off, so the panelists can't see or hear you. So really that Q&A function is the best and only way to communicate with the panelists. So please take advantage of it, ask your questions. Also, this is just one of many different sessions happening as part of the Collegewise College Fair series. So be sure to sign up for some additional sessions at www.strivescan.com/collegewise. Also, this presentation, as all the presentations are, being recorded. So you can come back to the website in a couple of days and revisit this or check out something you've missed. So I'd now like to introduce Casey from Collegewise. I'll turn it over to the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you everybody for joining us on a casual midday of a Tuesday or afternoon. My name's Casey Neer, pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm the Executive Director of Counseling here at Collegewise. And thank you for joining for this conversation. Just a few housekeeping things. My wonderful colleague Arun is going to be handling the Q&A. You can see his laughing face in his video right now, but you can obviously hide video, non-video participants if you want the full view. But feel free to put any questions you have in that Q&A spot as we go through, but we're going to really try and keep it conversational to stay present in this. And I will do a little brief of kind of why this session, but first I want to let our panelists introduce themselves and then I'll kick things off. So I'll start with Phil and then Wintress and then Yamilet.
Thanks, Casey. Thanks, Josh. Hello, everyone. My name is Phil Moreno. Pronouns are he, him, his. I am the Director of West Coast Recruitment for Dickinson College, a small liberal arts college in central Pennsylvania, but uniquely, I'm located in Long Beach, California. And October 1 was my 17th year working in college admissions, so wonderful to be here.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Wintress, pronouns she and her, and I am the Senior Assistant Director of Admissions, Texas Regional for Indiana University, Bloomington. So just like Phil, I am based regionally in my hometown of Dallas, Texas.
Hi, and good afternoon. My name is Yamilet Medina Lopez. I am at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. Pronouns are she, her, ella, and I am actually relocating this week to the Bay Area. I'm currently in Los Angeles, California, and this is my 16th year in college admission. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. And as Yamilet is living proof to, I do want to acknowledge, I was at a webinar and they acknowledged the fact that this is certainly not an easy year. And I would say that if you are in higher education and also just a human being in America this week, this is an anxious time. This is also right up against November 1st deadlines. So I just want to acknowledge that we all may seem cool and collected perhaps today, but we too are swirling with a lot of things underneath. So if you are a student out there feeling anxious and nervous, we see you, we understand. And if you're a parent or an adult who helps teenagers right now, thank you. And I think the point and the goal here today and the purpose of myth busting is that myths are really stories we tell ourselves. And more often than not, they are stories that make us feel worse. They make the options oftentimes feel smaller than they are. They make this process, when we're talking about college, feel harder or more out of reach than it actually might be. And so a lot of the purpose of busting these myths today is to make you feel better and not to sugarcoat things and not to blindly assuage worries. But as you heard, I think we collectively have over, maybe I'll add in Arun, who's roughly 100 years old. So we have collectively maybe 100 years of admission experience here amongst us. This is born of our collective experience and is not just us, trying to make you feel better for better's sake. So know that the wisdom that our panelists are going to share today and bust these myths is born of interacting with each of you on the recruitment trail and reading your files and getting to know you as people. So with that, we hope to bring your blood pressure down a little bit in our next 40 minutes. It's a quick amount of time, so we're going to try and talk as quickly as possible to cover a lot of ground. But I'm going to start with one of the myths that I have heard a lot, and as the graduate of a liberal arts college, if it isn't abundantly clear, I attended Scripps College. But is you need to know what you want to do with the rest of your life when you are 17 or whenever you decide you want to attend a 4-year or 2-year institution. And you have to know exactly that path and the major choice. And if you don't, your life will be in shambles. So I'm going to start with Phil, who's representative of one of our liberal arts colleges on the panel, to kind of talk about how you address that. Both the lived experience of Dickinson represents that isn't true, but also how you talk with students about that when you're talking about how they present themselves in their application.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. I always preface the fact that I work with a liberal arts college with the fact that actually I was someone who knew what I wanted to do. I was a broadcast journalism, political science major at the University of Southern California. I wanted to be a political reporter, and that's actually my side gig. After this, I'll be there. No, I'm just kidding. The idea, though, right, is that maybe growing up in California as a first-generation student, I was told you needed to know your major. The college is going to want to know that to be selected. But in fact, there are a plethora, a bounty of smaller colleges that inherent in their curriculum is the fact that you would come to them not knowing what you want to do. In fact, the curriculum is set up for exploration. The curriculum is, rather than 6 or 7 general education requirements, 12, 14 additional courses that complement whatever major you have. And I've worked at both Dickinson, University of Redlands, places where we really help students find their authentic interests and make them know that in the end, even if you majored in journalism, poli-sci, you don't necessarily have to go in that field. In fact, the Department of Labor shares that about 2/3 of folks actually end up working in a profession other than their major. And so liberal arts colleges are that great intentional way to be able to have a curriculum that will support you, to kind of help guide you through a process to find that authentic interest in a very clear way that's more intentional. And certainly here, the options like Occidental, Pomona, Scripps, Grinnell, McAllister, they may not be the big names that some of us know, but they're certainly amazing institutions, and the liberal arts may be exactly what you're looking for.
And I think, Wintress, you obviously represent a much larger school. And I think oftentimes we make assumptions that small equals I can be scatterbrained and not necessarily know what I want. And big equals I need to have a direct path. And I'd love to hear your perspective, representing a bigger institution, about your feelings around, what you want to do and if you need to know what you want to do.
Yeah, so I think that I'm fortunate to work for a university where we really pride ourselves on giving students the opportunities to explore and be flexible with their major choices. I know that there are some institutions, now there are some where you would need to know your major because they're major driven, but there are lots of large public schools where that is not the case. So at IU, 65% of our students come or enroll as freshmen as a pre-major or as exploratory. So that's what we call our undecided students. So they are exploratory majors on our campus because, again, we put a lot of stock and effort in helping our students find their right fit or find multiple fit majors on our campus. So I would just say be open when doing research, in that you're 17, 16, 17, and 18 years old. We don't expect you to know everything you want to do. I'm in my 30s and I still don't know everything I want to do. So it is okay to be completely, as I like to say, exploratory about what majors you're interested in.
I love that. And I think, Arun and I often talk about and try and reassure students that it's okay to be undecided, but you can't be uninterested, have interests and things that you're curious about. And I think that's exactly that, of figuring out what those things are can take time, but having something that fuels you, we hopefully want to see. The one big one that I hear in terms of myths, coming back to some other big ones, always tends to, and it shows its head, or rears its head in a lot of different ways, but it's born of one big myth, which is around this notion of scarcity, that there aren't enough spots to go around in American higher education. And it oftentimes comes in questions. Arun and I did a webinar recently talking about test optional, and somebody asked a very understandable question, but we hear this a lot, of if you have two exact applicants and they're exactly the same and one presents test scores and one doesn't, which one do you admit? And our panelist, who works at a wonderful long-term test optional school, said, I'd admit both. And we get stuck in this notion of binary, and that there are winners and losers in this process, and that we are all faced with a single choice of a yes or a no. So I wanted to turn this, Yamilet, to you a little bit of, you obviously represent an institution where, 19 out of the 20 kids that you might read aren't going to get a yes. And I think we all can reassure and know that those kids are going to be okay. But I would love to hear your sense of both how you talk to students and maybe what you've seen in the trajectory of your work with students about reassuring them that a yes from an institution doesn't necessarily dictate what comes next, and how you talk to students about that broader landscape.
Absolutely. So I will say, one of the things we do often get the question asked about, well, if two students are exactly the same, there aren't two students that are exactly the same. They're contextual pieces of the application, their lived experiences. Even if their numbers look the same, there are other things that are in that application that are going to be different. And so, and students oftentimes ask us that, and they are like, but I know my friend and I know this about them, but you just don't know everything about every applicant. And the other piece of this is that these are real human beings doing this work. And so many of us are working committees where there are other colleagues who also weigh into the process. So at least, at my institution, it is not a one person's decision to advance a candidate or not, or to recommend a student or to advocate. There's different words at different institutions, right? But it's not, one person doesn't decide. And often, prior to working at Stanford, I was another institution that also had a lower admit rate. And what I would often speak to families about is doing their research in terms of looking at how many of the schools that they are looking at are, how many schools out there have admission rates that are in the single digits. Because if you do that research, you're going to see that the list is not as long as we often hear. All right. There's a lot of buzz out there about how every school is turning down students, when in reality, there are so many institutions out there that have different admit rates than perhaps the institution that I'm representing, right? And the other thing that I find is that most of the time when I talk to those students that haven't been accepted, they have such amazing options that they do end up being just fine. They have a place to go. And so maybe it's not my institution, but they end up really having so many amazing options with other colleagues at other institutions, that most of them are going to be okay. And so it's just reassuring students that they are going to be okay. And I also, quite frankly, I do tell students, you're going to have a dream school, right? What you refer to as your dream school or your preferred school, but there is not just one university that is going to fit what you're looking for. If you have gone to an info session for some of the universities, you may hear us use a lot of the same languages, a lot of the same descriptors. There's things that we are all going to have in common. And again, most students are going to have other options. And so it's this, I really tell students, you have to get in this mindset of just focusing about what's happening with you, what's going on with you, and really, really trying hard not to worry about what the outcome is for your peers and those other ones around you. So I'll leave it at that.
I love that. And it does. I think we talk a lot about stress is born of focusing on what you can't control. And goodness, 2020 has presented us with pretty much a series of days that we can't control. But I think in this process, remembering what you do, which is how you present yourself to schools. If you're a senior right now in those essays, and if you're a younger student or a senior finalizing the list, what schools you select is a part of what you control. And I don't know if Phil or Wintress, there's anything that, if we're not looking at the percentage of students that a school denies, as a barometer of their, fit for you, what do you encourage students to look for instead? Because I think we can all agree that that number doesn't tell us anything about if I'm going to thrive there. And if there's anything you try and remind students of about what to look for them to thrive.
Yeah, I think that one of the things, especially as we mentioned earlier, that there is a place for every student. And many of our institutions we're not looking for reasons to deny a student, we're looking for reasons to admit a student. So I like to tell students, don't get so caught up into those numbers. But also, again, there are other institutions that are admitting students at greater numbers. We just have to be willing to broaden our horizons and really do the work to research other really great schools, where they may admit more of their applicants to apply, like an institution like mine. But we admit way more students than I think people realize. But again, I wouldn't be too concerned about what your peer is doing or where they're applying or what their application is looking like. You can only worry about what you can control. So really trying to control and submit materials that are representative of you, because in the end, it will all work itself out. But yes, that's all I have to add. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm going to get real. I went to a school my high school, where I had 950 high school freshmen and 360 of us graduated, and only 50 of us went to a four-year institution. It was a privilege for me to get to go to USC. But when I look at things, I looked at Cal States, I looked at UCs. I was just looking for any place that would help me pay for college. We in America treat education as a commodity. And unfortunately, sometimes we look at rankings. Sometimes we look at what other peoples are doing, right? And we use that as a gauge for what the right college is. And I think Wintress and Yamilet are right. You need to be taking this from the point of view of what is it that you desire? Who is it that you are? And realize that you live in a country with so many opportunities that you should not look at the top 100, not even the top 200. And you're going to find not only are there institutions that will admit you, they'll give you scholarships to kind of get you to make that affordable. I think too often in California, when even here in Long Beach, Cal State Long Beach is 20% admit rate, we think that equates to good. And really that's economic supply and demand. You need to open up your eyes to these other wonderful opportunities, because on average, schools in the United States admit about 67% of those who apply. We sometimes just live in our bubbles and don't realize that. So absolutely, look at other options. There are plenty of opportunities out there if you're just willing to think outside that box.
Yes, thank you. That was a good rallying cry. No, and I think that the vast majority of colleges admit the vast majority of applicants. And I think we forget that what makes things by definition newsworthy is that they are outliers, that they are exceptional to the rule, not the rule itself. And so we hear stories and they become myths that kid who's, brokered peace between two nations and saves kittens in trees every other Tuesday and, has knit scarves for everyone in their neighborhood. And they too got denied from X school. So you also won't have a future. And I know we all nod our heads, shake our heads, whatever, because we hear that story come every almost certain first week of April when decisions come out. But it comes out because it's exceptional. It's not true in the sense that the vast majority of kids are able to go to college if they want to. I think one other myth that comes up a lot is this notion of the formula of you need to do X and Y and Z and equals. you will get admitted to any of these schools, right? And it's understandable. We've all sat across, remember ye old college fairs when we used to do this in person, a table where somebody would ask, how many community service hours do I need to do to get into Dickinson? Or how many AP classes do I need to do to get into Kelly if I want to study business, right? And I think it's understandable because high school has certain parameters you need to check off to graduate, and we assume the same thing applies to admission. But I want to kind of open this up, come off mute. If there are any things that either in the application process that belie that, of actually we ask essay questions that speak to the exact opposite, or the admission process that you at your institutions have that speaks to, I guess, this notion of what we're coming to as holistic admission.
I'll bite first. I think that in a holistic review process, there is not a set formula. And I just want to reiterate that, because students think if I do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to get admitted to this program. And I see it every year. Every year we have a different pool of applicants. So what a student did last year that would work for one school and be admitted, it may not work in this year's model, especially in the world that we're living in currently amid a pandemic. So as far as the institution to use holistic review, it just comes down to a multitude of factors. It's not just one thing that's going to get you admitted. There are some institutions where they do utilize benchmarks for students, and those are typically schools where they're not holistic review. So that's something to be mindful of. But when it comes to holistic review in that process, there's not a set formula. It's really a multitude of factors there's a long list of things that schools are considering. So I wouldn't get bogged down into those details. I would tell students do what makes you comfortable, what makes you happy, and what comes easy to you, and everything else will work itself out and work into place for the benefit of you.
Yeah, I think I'll add just along those lines, and really this even reemphasizes the point we were saying before. I do often tell students, if you want to be able to predict this process, like if you want to know what's going to happen, there are institutions out there that what the end result is going to be before you even apply, because they're open. They tell you, here's how it works. Wintress made reference to some of, there are schools that will say if a student is in the top 10% or top 8% and has X, Y, Z, that's the formula, right? When a school is looking at a holistic review process, so again, the institution I'm working for now and my previous institution, most of the candidates who applied met, right? Because people always want to know, what are those numbers? And so most of the students, if you looked at those numbers and that's all that you considered, most students were going to be competitive in that part of the process. But then there's all the other pieces that right? And so again, looking at a student's lived experiences, looking at a student's personal circumstances, again, trying to understand what opportunities were available to students, looking at students in the context of their school, right? If their school doesn't offer APs, then how do students there show academic success in other ways? So it's not just a blanket formula. You really want to be able to consider all of these different pieces of the student in the context that they are in. And so again, unfortunately, you can't predict the outcome if you are at some of our schools, right? And then there are other schools where you can. And so it's just being able to do that research, understand what that means. And somebody mentioned this earlier, and I think it was you, Casey. You do have control over that list of schools, right? You don't have control over the decisions we're going to make, but you do control what that list is going to look like. And so at the end of the day, even if we say no, and I tell students this all the time, that's a loss for us because most of the time students are going to be fine. And like Wintress said, there's going to be a place for them. So they're going to find that place.
I think one thing that has surprised people this year, and I know we always say, Arun and I always say, we're not going to talk about testing because it's the question that everybody gets, but I'm going to flip it so we don't have to talk about the granular elements of test optional. But I do think it speaks to this notion of, the fact that it was so easy for many institutions, most at this point, to drop as a requirement speaks exactly and kind of highlights what we've all been saying, which is that America, by and large, has been a holistic review process. And there have been, institutions, hundreds of whom were test optional, Dickinson being one, before this happened. And I think recognizing that holistic, I don't know how many times colleges need to say you are more than that number for people to believe it. But is there anything, and again, feel free to just come off of mute, that oftentimes people fixate on that number and go, well, what do you look at? What do you care about? Is there anything that maybe would surprise students and parents that you look at or get excited about, or that you cheer on when you see in an application?
Yeah, I think that maybe this is surprising. We look at everything. Maybe you don't think we do. And I think sometimes that happens, right, when you're focusing in on just the essay or you're focusing in on just the test scores, right? The reality is that it's the way that a decision comes to most of the colleagues that I've worked with is it evolves from the time that you open up that application and you read their name, where they're from, what their background is, what activities they did, right? What courses they're involved with now. So that by the time I get to your transcript, which has the most weight, absolutely, because I can review it in context of what school you're at, what academic rigor was offered to you, what did you take, what did you perform, those other elements like the test score don't have that much weight because it is that entire, it's why most students say they choose the college they do because they just felt right. Folks on our side, we admit the students we do because it felt right based on what we know about our institution, who we're recruiting, and that application that you put there. And I think, Dickinson, having been a long time test optional, was so, in a position to say, we're just going to be test free, test blind this year. We're going to let folks know that it doesn't matter. We won't even look at it if you submit it. And I think to your point, Casey, the fact that so many other institutions were willing to go test optional points that it's not just one thing. We have to stop fixating on this is the thing, whether it's the test score or the Costco essay that gets someone in or out, it's everything.
Yeah, and I just want to add, because IU, the current institution I work for, we announced that we were going test optional back in January. And part of that was that we, for the past few years, our office, board of trustees, faculty council, we've been doing that research, and we've just really found that, what's going to predict that a student is going to be successful on our campus is more so their lived experiences and also, the classes that they've taken at their high school and the grades they've made in those particular classes. So although students can still submit the test scores, we have just found that for us moving forward, it's a permanent decision we made before everything transpired, that we really want to put more weight, as Phil said, in that transcript and really lean into what a student has already actually done over the years of their high school career versus, that first sitting or second sitting of a test that they're only going to take once or twice or maybe 3 times for some. So those are things that we're thinking about, really leaning into what you've already done and what you've worked for over the course of years versus just one test.
I think I'll just add one more thing is that I know that there are certain students who don't think that their home responsibilities or working or taking care of a family member is something that colleges look at. But I will say, again, when we're looking at your specific lived experience and your circumstances, sometimes I talk to students who may be to other students at their school, they're like, oh, well, you're not involved in extracurricular activities, but it's because they perhaps think of them in a more, I would say, less flexible. They think of them in a less flexible way. When in reality, if you are, sometimes someone who has responsibilities at home, taking care of younger siblings or even grandparents, there's lots of other things that we consider. And so, I think when we look at how students spend their time outside of the classroom, we don't, again, it's not a formula. It's not, it has to be this, and this, right? Sometimes I get like the question of how many clubs should I be in and how much time, and what sports are the ones that are, that you pay most attention to. And again, like it really depends on the student and what they have opportunities to do or what they choose to do with their time. And so we look at how students spend their time, I would say, in a really broad sense and not just so narrowly tailored. And so I think sometimes that surprises some students, either because they don't think of those activities or how they spend their time in that way as, extracurricular time, or other students maybe think that because someone isn't just involved in school clubs or organizations, they may not bring as much to a campus. And so again, it's looking more at that context of that application. So it goes back to really just focusing on what you are bringing to your application and not on what's happening around you.
Yeah, and I think to Jamilet's point, I don't know if people realize that in Common App in the activities section, there's a drop down, and one of them is family responsibilities. There's literally a category for this. So we really mean it when we say that there's a category to present things that you do to take care of your family and your loved ones. There's also, sometimes people are surprised to see a social justice category. If you spend a lot of your time fighting for social justice causes, that's maybe not student body president, but it's arguably going to make just as much of an impact on a campus. And so a college would love to hear about that. One question that came up in the chat, and I think has kind of percolated as you've been talking about what matters, is this notion of rigor and academic coursework. And I think kind of want to fit in a mini myth amidst that of this notion of I have to jam pack my schedule. And it's going to vary obviously amongst your three institutions, but jam pack when I hear rigor equals take every AP class that my high school offers, even if it's counter to perhaps my own academic interests. And so the question was kind of positioned around, is it better to take that list of all AP classes, or to take classes that are some AP, maybe IB if that's your coursework, whatever it is, and some that are mixed in with your actual interests if you already have them. And kind of, I'd love to hear from each of you, since you represent different institutions, how you would answer that question. Phil, do you want to start, and then Wintress?
Yeah, I think one of the luxuries that I have working at a small school that gets about 6,000 applications, where I can spend 10 to 15 minutes on an application, is I get to do a deep dive in that transcript. I get to see what course selection is there. And I will tell you, I never go to any transcript assuming you're going to have taken all APs and all honors. That's never an assumption on my part. Again, when I'm reading through that application, if I see you might have an interest in a particular subject, that's when I start looking, okay, well, if you're looking to do pre-health, pre-med, are you taking the math courses that you need to get there? And if you did you challenge yourself with an AP or honor? Was it even offered there, right? And then how did you perform? Okay, maybe you didn't take that AP English because you were focused on this, but you still took an honors English, right? There is no formula, and I do have the ability to look at that transcript and look for that nuance. And I tell you what that does for me. It shows me a level of intentionality in how you construct your course selection that's going to make me a better advocate for you when I go into committee or I go into a later round of admission. And so again, for me, it's never an assumption that you've taken all of that. It's more contextual. And then again, if there's that intentionality, then that's what we're looking for.
So one of the things that I want to highlight is when you're applying typically for a public institution, we have our own, or our systems, or our state, whoever our governing bodies are. They typically have a list of courses that we want to see all students take. So that's a first bit of that review process. So we're not necessarily looking for whether the students have taken an AP class or not. We're looking, have you taken a certain amount of credit hours or semesters of English, math, social sciences, all of those subjects. So we're gonna look for that first. Then on my campus, I'm looking, what is the student's major that they're interested in? What is the high school profile? So what courses does the high school offer? Are there rules on how many AP classes a student can take, or IB classes or dual credit courses? So then I'm gonna look at, the school profile, looking at the classes that the student has taken and the grades they've made. But also, and I have a perfect example because we're in the midst of our review, if you maxed out all the AP courses at your high school, but you didn't do well, that is probably, we're gonna look for that. So we wanna look to see that a student has challenged themselves and that they were successful at challenging themselves. And if I see a student who went really hard and took a lot of AP or IB classes and then decided, maybe I needed to take a step back because I wasn't performing well, that is something that we like to see. That is great because the student was able to assess their performance in the class, and they realized, oh, maybe all of these AP classes aren't for me. So for an institution like mine, it's great to see that students are taking honors courses, but we're not tied to that because, again, we're looking to see, what a student has done, the choices they've made, and how it complements what they want to do in the future.
I think Phil did speak about this really well in terms of understanding the transcript that you're evaluating based on, again, what is available at that school. And so, we're not looking, when I am talking, and I'm talking about it right now, talking about starting our review process, no one's saying there's got to be this many APs on that transcript. But what we do expect is that if students have the ability to challenge themselves, that they are doing that they are taking advantage of those opportunities. I'll give a good example. I just last week was looking at some applications from rural California where the school offers 4 AP courses and there are no community colleges in the area, right? Students can do online work, and it's not because of COVID. This is all they've been able to do, period, because there is no other place where they live to access other additional courses. So even if a student wanted to add other things to their transcript, they would have to find other ways to do that. And we don't expect for students to do that if they're not able to, right? And so again, I think this is why we ask perhaps so many other questions in the application to get an understanding of what students can do with the opportunities that they have, and then really try to look at their coursework from that lens. I think Wintress gave some really good examples. If you load up on AP courses or IB courses or advanced or honors, whatever they're called, at your institution, but you're not doing well, then maybe you have to take a step back. So, it's looking for that balance. I will add, there are institutions, if you are applying to STEM majors, so science, technology, engineering, and math, that will require advanced math and science, and most of them will tell you that. They will say, these are the types of classes that we are looking for when students apply to those certain majors. And so, again, it's really doing that research and having that understanding, but that is not every institution. And so, we joke a lot in college admissions that it depends, seems to be almost the answer for a lot of things, if not everything, but it really does depend. And it depends on the institution, the student, lots of different factors. And quite frankly, I think that's why this process sometimes can be so difficult for folks, because there's not a clear-cut formula. But there are always people trying to figure out what that formula is, right? And so I think that's really one of the main things. Is just, again, it goes back to doing your research and having that understanding of the different institutions that you are looking at and how they perhaps look at those academic components.
Yes, I think, yes, I think all of us have leaned on the it depends. And I think for a session that obviously we are trying to lower the blood pressure, and hilariously, I received an alert on my watch that my blood pressure was quite high. So even I have been anxious during this when we're trying to not be. But I think, it's very tempting, and it can feel soothing to have a formula. So it's understandable why we reach for it. It can feel reassuring to go, okay, if I do this and I do that, then I'll get in here. But I think what we're trying to say here is that while we can't do that because we've decided to be a holistic admission for the most part set of schools, though as Wintress pointed out, there are plenty that aren't, and they do post things, and our UK brethren would say, we have done that for years. We make it pretty clear who gets in and who doesn't. We also say that if you don't get in, you're going to be okay too. And I think that's the bigger narrative here, is that the formula doesn't change the fact that there are plenty of spots. And so I know we have 3 minutes left, and I want to promise to end things on time. And I want to give our panelists some time to collect themselves, to maybe present a final, whether it's a parting word of wisdom or thing that you wish students really thought about, especially those who are in attendance right now, who are seniors or juniors, who are feeling like this year is just different than obviously they thought it would be. And whether it's advice or things that you wish students really internalize this cycle, because I know we've all felt like we're saying the same things over and we just wish they heard it, or things for the younger students watching that you want them to understand is important in this process. And I think I can start by a few minutes of time here, but I do think that one thing that I wish, students thought about or recognized is how important it is to understand the world around you and the neighborhood that you live in. And, we talk a lot about we're all in a storm, but we're all in very different boats. And I think it's how important it is to take a moment to understand the different boats everybody is in. And that awareness is a huge value in this process, and also knowing where you eventually apply. So I'll just put that one out there. Phil, Wintress, and Yamilet.
Yeah, I think, information in this process is power. And what I hope you've gleaned today is the humanity behind the admissions folks that get to read your application. When you submit it, it goes in the cloud and comes back onto our screens. Wintress, Yamilet, and I, we are people. We are human just like you. And the way that you connect with us is owning your story. Do not doubt any of the natural human tendencies to think you're not enough, to think that this failure is going to lead to you not getting into the perfect or right college. If you own your identity, know that that humanity is going to connect with us. And that's how you're going to feel confident of going through this process.
And to complement owning your story, my biggest piece of advice that I always give students that I wish I had when I was a high school student is the thought of self-advocacy. Being able to speak up for yourself and take a hold of this process, because this is your process. Yes, your parents and your families are there to support you. And for many of us, if you're first gen like me, you're bringing everyone behind you. But ultimately, this is about you in your future. So being able to advocate for yourself with your teachers, your counselors, admissions reps, please do that, because again, it is your process and it's your future.
And I think just to complement all of that, I'll add, just like you own your story, and just like you bring your entire selves to this work, so do we, the people who do the work. And so again, we are really coming from a place of understanding. I think someone said this earlier. We're not looking for reasons to deny students, but ultimately we do make difficult decisions. And what I want students to understand is that those decisions do not mean anything about you or your character, right? They don't. This is not personal in the sense of the decision we make, but it is a personal process in what you've put forward. And that we do understand. We review, and I speak for myself, but many of my colleagues, we do this work carefully and thoughtfully. The decisions are very difficult. They should be difficult, right? I always say they should feel really difficult to make these decisions. But at the end of the day, this is not a judgment on you as a person. And so I just try to remind students of that, because I wish someone would have probably told me that when I was going through this process. I think I would have probably just thought about it in a different way, but I didn't have that. And so I do reiterate that to students a lot in that sense, to try not to sort of see this as a failure, if it's not, again, right, the school that maybe you preferred, because you probably have lots of other great options. And in the end, you're going to be okay. So, yeah.
I love that. Thank you. And I think reminding everybody that just like you are living through this, your admission counselors are as well. So we are in this together, like it or not. Well, thank you so much to our panelists. This was wonderful and hopefully soothing to some of you out there. And I'm going to turn it back to Josh, I think, to close things out.
Yeah, thank you so much, Casey, and thank you so much to the panelists, and thank you so much to all of you, parents, students, counselors, for joining us wherever it is that you are. When you close this window, there will be a link to a very quick 4-question survey. We'd really appreciate any feedback that you can provide. Also, as I mentioned before, this is just one of many sessions happening as part of this College Fair series, so be sure to sign up for some additional sessions. Some are happening right now, right after this one. In about a week, you'll be able to find this session's recording as well as all of the other sessions recordings online at the same place where you registered. So thanks again. Thank you to the panel, and everybody have a great evening.